Well, the pace of innovation in battery technology is accelerating, and the impact on our daily lives, from transportation to energy storage, is about to get a whole lot more interesting. Welcome to EV Society's Canada Talks Electric Cars. EV Society is a not-for-profit organization which strives to educate and advocate for sustainable transportation in Canada. We hope you will consider joining EV Society with your $50 annual membership, which helps to make activities like this webinar possible. We've intentionally structured today's episode to leave a little more time to answer your battery-related questions. Please submit them at any time and use the Q&A button on the Zoom toolbar to do that. Remember too that you may also upvote any posted question, which helps us to address the most pressing ones in the time we have available. We're delighted indeed to welcome back Dr. Jeff Dahn, a world-renowned authority and researcher of batteries. Dr. Dahn is a professor emeritus at the Department of Physics and Atmospheric Science and the Department of Chemistry at Dalhousie University. If you missed his excellent presentation on our webinar last year, be sure to check out our YouTube channel for the recording. And I am going to put a link to that in the notes underneath this recording so you can find it easily. Dr. Dahn, thanks for joining us today, and welcome back for another episode of Canada Talks.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I'm excited to be here and spend some time talking about batteries.
Wonderful. Well, last year's presentation created a whole lot of questions relating to a lot of different things. One of the things in particular was the then sort of up and coming LFP or iron phosphate batteries. And I believe you're going to be addressing some aspects of that today.
Yep, I'll have a little section on LFP today.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, listen, I am not going to dwell. I'm going to get out of the way and let you get things rolling.
Okay, I'll share my screen and begin. Okay, I think you should be able to see my screen and my laser pointer.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I'll begin. So today I want to talk about a couple of things. Review what I've said before about maximizing lifetime of NMC lithium-ion cells that would be used in many electric vehicles. Addressing why LFP batteries need to be charged to 100% periodically to maintain range accuracy. I want to talk about vehicle to grid, explain what it is, and answer the question, will it wear out my battery? And then talk about what's happening with respect to second use of EV batteries, because I'll show you that there'll be a lot of battery life remaining after your vehicle has rusted away or otherwise fallen apart. So I want to start by just mentioning that the voltage of an NMC lithium-ion cell varies with its state of charge. And this is a voltage curve for a typical NMC graphite cell, where the voltage varies from about 4.3 volts at 100% state of charge down to about 3.2 volts when it's fully discharged. And when the voltage is higher, the positive electrode is more reactive to the electrolyte in the cell, and this causes more rapid degradation. And for electric vehicles, the upper cutoff can be set to less than 100% state of charge. And here I've just shown a dashed red line here at 83%, or about 4.1 volts. And many EV users operate cells under restricted state of charge ranges. So, for example, you might charge to 83% or 80% or 70%, but only discharge, normally a relatively small amount before you charge again. So 83 to 63 shown here would be 20% depth of discharge range. Or here I'm showing 83 to 45%, which would be a 38% depth of discharge range. And when you do this, you restrict the volume changes of the electrode materials that take place during the charge-discharge cycle And this prolongs lifetime, as I'll show you in the next couple of slides. So this chart shows the discharge capacity of small NMC 622 graphite pouch cells. So NMC 622 graphite is a fairly common electric vehicle battery. And I'm plotting these versus time. While they're doing a charge in 3 hours and a discharge in 3 hours continuously at 40 degrees C. And these cells are charging to 4.1 volts or 83% state of charge, like I showed you on the previous slide. So 8,700 hours is 1 year. So these cells have been testing continuously for about 2.5 years. And I'm showing you the final number of charge-discharge cycles that have taken place. So the green cells are going from 83% to 100%. And you can see that their discharge capacity has degraded to maybe about 75% of original over this time. The red is going from 83 to 23%, and the blue from 83 to 45, and then the black is just a 20% state of charge range. And you can see capacity retention is incredibly good. Now, what's really important to notice is these sparse data points of the same colors up at the top. So every about 500 hours, we do a full 83% to 0% state of charge cycle on all the cells. And then you can see how well the full capacity or the full state of health of the black test, how that cell is comparing to the cell that you had operated over the full state of charge range. And it's very clear that doing lots and lots of small state of charge range cycles is much, much better for your battery health than doing infrequent charges where you let the battery go almost down to 0% before you charge. And the same is true as if you go from 83 to 23, you have the red when you look at the state of health cycles. Now, one thing to notice here is that all these cells were charging and discharging with the exact same currents for the exact same amount of time. So they've all would have driven an electric vehicle the same distance over that time period. And if this was in a 400 kilometer EV, the vehicle would have traveled about 1.5 million kilometers, which is, way more than a vehicle would ever last before it falls apart. But clearly, if you do lots of short drives followed by charging, you'll have a battery in much better health at the end of this time period. And that battery has value for second use and so forth. And then we continued these tests for a longer time. In fact, we continued the tests for the cells going from 83 to 63%, operating at room temperature for 6.5 years. And you can see that when you look at the cycles that we use to check the state of health, there's been almost no degradation at all, and you would have driven 4 million kilometers. It's amazing. And for the cells operated at 40 degrees C, which is the case on the previous slide, we've extended the time to about 3 years of testing. And again, you can see that if you are doing the charging frequently scenario from 83 to 63%, the state of health is much better than if you're doing infrequent charging. So it's clear that charging very often is preferred. And if you have a level 2 charger at home, this is the way you should operate. You should charge to, I would recommend about 70%. And then when you discharge down to 45 or so, I'll put it back on the charger. And obviously, if you need to go on a long trip, charge to 100% without any worry. No problem at all. So now I want to talk about more modern lithium-ion batteries. And the trend is to move towards high nickel content NMC batteries and also to use LFP batteries. And these are both very long lifetime. and suited for vehicle to grid and second use. So here we have a slide that's a little bit complex, but I want to spend the time to walk you through it because it's important for understanding how high nickel content NMC batteries operate and how you should use them. So on the top panel, I show how the voltage versus specific capacity of different NMCs vary. So this is NMC 532. It means 50% nickel, 30% manganese, 20% cobalt. And this is 80% nickel, 10% manganese, 10% cobalt. And this material has 94% nickel and a little bit of cobalt and manganese. And you can see that as the nickel content increases, there's this flat region in the voltage curve that gets more and more pronounced. And this flat region in the voltage curve corresponds to a point where the volume of the electrode material particles contracts a lot. And that's shown in the lower panels. If you follow the black curve, which corresponds to the right-hand axis, this corresponds to the crystallographic unit cell. It's like the size of a brick in a brick wall. A brick wall is made of many bricks, and a solid is made of many unit cells of atoms in the unit cell. And this shows that when you go through about 4.2 volts for this nickel 94 material, there's very large collapse in the unit cell volume. And these big volume changes can lead to damage to the electrode particles and other undesirable things. And if you avoid them by charging just to before this plateau, which corresponds to about 75% of the full charge, you can get much longer lifetime. So here's an example of NMC 811 graphite cells operating at 40 degrees C. They're doing a 3-hour charge and a 3-hour discharge. And one battery is charging to 4.2 volts, the blue, and one is charging to 4.06 volts, the black one. And you can see on the capacity axis that the black one is about 80% of the initial capacity of charging to 4.2. And you can see that the capacity retention of the cell charging to 80%, the black one, is much better. And if you look at the normalized or fractional capacity comparing to the capacity what it was at the first cycle, the black one has over 90% after 3,000 charge-discharge cycles. And then this lower graph shows you a metric that's proportional to the internal resistance of the battery, and that determines the power that the battery can deliver. And you can see that the internal resistance of the 4.2 volt or 100% state of charge cell has doubled over these cycles, whereas the 4.06 one has not changed at all. Now, if you ask how far would you have driven at 1,000 cycles, it's 500,000 kilometers roughly. So, you know, this is really getting to the point where the vehicle would be falling apart. But the battery still has a ton of life left, especially if you're charging it to 80% all that time. So these batteries and the ones I spoke about previously are suitable to vehicle to grid and second life. If you're operating to this 80% state of charge, you know, you get really long lifetime. And these cells are going from 80% all the way to zero, 80% all the way to zero every time. And it's very, very impressive what these high nickel materials can do. And as the trend moves towards even higher nickel content, and this is because they give increased energy density, which to the EV user means a longer driving range. The trend is the same, meaning if you charge the 100% state of charge, the black, the capacity decays much more rapidly than if you avoid this large volume change region the blue, you get much longer lifetime. So pretty much a good rule of thumb for any NMC type battery is charge to 70, 75%, and you'll be in a very good shape. I know this is about electric vehicles, and I guess an electric bike is an electric vehicle in a way. There's a company called Zen Electric Bikes that uses these high nickel content lithium ion cells, and the battery management system that's on the handlebars that you control when you're operating your bike has two modes. It has a long life mode, which is the default mode, and in that case, it charges the batteries to 4.06 volts or 80% state of charge. So the idea is it's going to make the battery in your bike last a very long time. But if you want to go on a very long bike trip, you can override the long life mode and go into long range mode and charge all the way to 4.2 volts. So it's taking the kind of learning that EV users and EV makers have learned and transferring it to the e-bike world. So now I want to talk about LFP. So EV manufacturers of LFP powered cars recommend setting charge limits to 100% and charging to 100% frequently to maintain range accuracy. Why would this be the case? In fact, if you look at information that Ford provides its EV users, if you have lithium iron phosphate batteries, it says set the maximum charge level to 100%. Charge to 100% at least once per month to maintain estimated in-vehicle range accuracy, both state of charge and distance to empty. If not charged 100% at least once per month, owners may experience degraded vehicle performance and a decrease in the accuracy of the vehicle's estimated range. For NMC, it says set the maximum charge level to 90% to reduce strain on the battery. I would recommend this to be more like 75. The Tesla Model Y, if you have LFP, it might be hard for you to read this at home because of the color here. This is a photo of the dashboard of the computer screen on the Tesla Model Y with LFP. It says, we recommend keeping your charge limit at 100% and charging fully once per week. So let's examine why this is the case. So if you look at the voltage versus state of charge for the NMC 811, which is a very common vehicle battery, the black curve, you can see the voltage varies significantly and almost smoothly with the state of charge. So by measuring the voltage per cell of an EV pack, you pretty much know where you are. For example, if you measure 3.75 volts, you know that you're about 62.5% state of charge. It's very simple. But for LFP, the red, imagine that you're in this region between about 70 and 100% state of charge, where the voltage curve is very flat. Then a voltage measurement doesn't tell you where you are, because the voltage is the same across this large region of state of charge. So what the battery management system does is rely on charge counting. So when it's discharging, it's counting the number of electrons that are being used to discharge the cell. When the cells are charging, it's counting the number of electrons. And the accuracy of these charge counters is not perfect. And after a week or so, without resetting all the way to 100%, they lose range accuracy. So you need to reset the charge counters by charging to 100% from time to time. Now, this is not a problem with LFP batteries at all. You don't have to worry about it. Just to go ahead and charge 100% happily, and it's not gonna matter. So the point of this is, by operating the battery in your EV in a way to extend the battery life, you can keep more value in the battery. And for example, you can hopefully get involved with vehicle to bit vehicle to grid programs or virtual power plants. These are both coming along. And at the end of time, the battery in your car will be valuable for second use. And I want to talk about these topics for a minute. So vehicle to grid is a very simple thing to imagine. You know, when the sun is shining or the wind is blowing, parked vehicles should be charging. And of course, the solar and wind should be powering our towns and our cities. And at night, when there's no sun and maybe no wind, the vehicle batteries can discharge to power the car, but to a point where you still have enough charge in the battery of your vehicle to drive yourself, in the morning to work or wherever you need to go. So you will set the parameters that the utility can use for charging and discharging the battery in your car. And you might say, okay, you can charge me to 70% during the sunshine, and at night you can take me down to 40. And that would not stress your battery at all. It could handle that for years and years and years. And they'll pay you for the use of your battery. I've heard numbers like 10 cents a kilowatt hour for energy stored and delivered back. So that's a pretty good deal in many provinces. And this is happening in Canada now. There's a company in Montreal called DC Bell Energy, which is setting up bidirectional charging and vehicle to grid in the Montreal region. There's a company in Toronto called Peak Power that's setting up vehicle to grid. Connected vehicles can discharge during peak demand to reduce facility load. Bidirectional chargers create opportunities for facility owners and drivers to sell electricity back to the grid. Electric school buses are perfect for vehicle to grid because you know exactly their routes, how many kilometers they're going to drive every day, when they're going to be parked, when they're going to be moving. Typically, they're parked when school is in session, which is during the sunny part of the day. They can charge at that time and then deliver some of their energy back during the night. Second use EV batteries is coming on very strong across the US and in Canada and in Europe and in Australia, all over the place. This is a photograph of used EV batteries in a container in California that are connected to the grid, all wired up, storing energy from the grid and delivering it back. Moment Energy is a firm in Coquitlam, BC that uses used EV batteries and makes energy storage systems from them. And this is really nice. It's a company of about 50 people in Coquitlam and growing very rapidly. If you look here, you'll notice all these batteries are the same from the same vehicle, and that makes it easier to do this, but they need not be the same. So there's another professor at Dalhousie University named Lucas Swan who runs the Renewable Energy Storage Lab, and he has a shipping container that has 4 completely distinct used EV batteries in it, and they're all hooked up together with a appropriate battery management system and storing energy from the grid when renewables are available and delivering it back when they're not available. So second use doesn't rely on having all the batteries of the same type. So that's really quite good. So anyway, the point of this little session was to show you that you can operate your EV in a way to prolong battery life and retain value in the battery. And in the future, many EVs will be set up for vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, and setting the state of charge limits won't wear out your battery. You know, if you knew exactly what battery was in your vehicle, it would be easy to contact somebody like me and say, how should I operate this thing? But many times it's hard to find out exactly what chemistry is in your vehicle. And if you do this, you'll be able to make some cash storing energy and delivering it back. And when it's time to sell your vehicle or retire it, the battery in a high state of health will have more value. And second use is growing rapidly, and there'll be a market for these batteries. So anyway, that's all I had in a prepared lecture. And you know, as Tim mentioned, we wanted to leave a lot of time for Q&A, so I'm going to stop sharing and we'll move to that.
Thank you, Jeff. Before Jason comes on, and just make a couple of comments, if I may. It's interesting when you talk about the, that 80% magic sort of maximum state of charge. My cell phone has that feature, and I'm able to set it that way, plug it in, go to bed, and in the morning it doesn't go past 80% state of charge. So I thought for ages that would be a smart thing to do. I wish my laptop had that feature, because I look at it plugged in 24/7 and I think that can't be good. But
Yeah.
it's a pain to manage, unplug it and plug it just to keep that.
Do
But
you have an Apple phone by chance?
I do.
Well, you
Yes.
know, it's funny because one of my former students, Aaron Smith, did a lot of work on battery lifetime, and he was hired by Tesla and worked at Tesla for some period of time. And then I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years, he moved to Apple. And I think he's the guy that was behind this switch that Apple made to allow you to charge to 80%, because that was a lot of the type of things that he realized the importance of, charging to 80% as a student and then at Tesla.
Yeah, and it's been my experience with cell phones that it's often the battery that causes it to reach its useful life. And it's, yeah, sure, it gets left behind in other software features, but still, if you just want a cell phone, it's usually the battery that kills it. And then, replacing that is a big expense, and
Yep.
often not worth it. Um, the other thing I just wanted to touch on to clarify, when you talked about the need to reset your LFP battery to 100% once a month or on some regular interval, just so that it doesn't get lost in terms of its actual state of charge. That's simply a measurement issue, right? It doesn't change the health of the battery in any way. It just, when they talk about it, it may degrade performance. I wasn't sure what they were referring to, the actual usefulness of the battery, or it's just the
No,
accuracy
I
of the
think when
state.
they talk about degrade performance, they mean you won't know what state of charge you're really at. The car won't know.
Yeah,
So it'll be telling you, okay, you have 300-kilometer range, and you might learn, oh my goodness, I only have 150. Once the voltage gets down off the flat part and the thing can use voltage to sense where it is, it'll say, oh my goodness, I'm at 40%. It's telling you I was at 70, but I'm really at 40.
yeah, okay. Yeah, that's classified as a performance issue for sure, but it doesn't harm the battery. That's all I just
No,
wanted to clarify.
no. Charging to 100% with LFP is really, really not an issue.
Yeah. And I'll do a plug-in for anybody who's interested in following up. We did have actually, I believe it was the CEO from Peak Power on doing one of these episodes on our webinar, and that's recorded on our YouTube channel. And I can put a link to that as well if you want to go back and hear about what they're doing. It's been a while, and thank you, Jeff, because now I think it makes sense that I reach out to them perhaps and get an update on how that project is going, because it's, as you say, it's coming, right? It's going to
Yeah,
go
it's coming.
everywhere. Yeah, yeah. All right, and I'm going to look up Lucas Swan, because I think he might have an interesting bit of information to share with our attendees as well at some point in the future. So thanks for that. I'm going to call on Jason Arnaud, one of our great EV Society members, the guy who filled in for me last month. Jason, if you could join us.
Good
Hey,
evening.
there he is. I think we had some questions roll in. Maybe you could take a peek and walk us through some.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Dahn, as well. As a longtime EV owner, I learned a lot today, and I look forward to some of these questions. The first one, why can't the software in an EV manage the optimal level of charge to extend battery life? Why is the onus on the driver to constantly manage this?
Well, I think there's some level where you can let the car do a lot. So for example, in my EV, I set the charge to 70%, and I don't think about it. So the car's managing it. But for a long trip, I go to 100%, right? So the car's not going to know when you're going to go on a long trip. You have to tell it. So I think the car does manage and tell you, you know, once you decide where you want to put the upper cutoff, it will just keep it that way, right? Now, in terms of telling you when it's time to charge, this is sort of a personal decision. The car can't make you charge at 50%, right? And it's not going to the EV is still going to work fine if you go down to 10%. It's still battery's going to outlast vehicle most likely. But if you want to be able to do vehicle to grid and you want to have value at second life, you want to charge, when you get to the 40% range. That's when it's possible, right? Yeah.
Surely some of it is too, if I could jump in, is marketing too. I mean, this is a kind of a nascent industry, and electric cars are new. And if you want to get into the weeds with somebody who's looking at their very first electric car, it can quickly become overwhelming, I think.
Yeah.
So
Oh, definitely.
I think the approach they've taken, where you can kind of rise to the level of your knowledge and use the state of charge setting accordingly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Next one is an interesting one. LFP batteries have been around for a while in the marine world. Why are they more or less recent for EV use?
Yeah. Well, I think the real reason is when EVs were first introduced, there was a huge emphasis on the need for range, before you charge. So this led the EV makers to really focus on high energy density NMC type chemistries. And then LFP, you could make a pretty good car, right? And then people realized, well, LFP cells are just that little bit more safer than NMC. Lithium ion batteries are very, very safe. Don't get me wrong. But in an abuse scenario, LFP batteries are somewhat safer than NMC. So you can make them bigger and you can make them rectangular. So once they're rectangular and bigger, you can pack them more efficiently in a battery pack. And that helps to lower cost. And then the range is not so bad and the cost is good. So LFP starts to look pretty darn attractive, right? And an LFP powered EV is a darn good car.
Okay, thank you. And questions are coming in. So here's a popular one that we talk about a lot. Why is it that I've heard EVs need battery replacements every 10 years, even though you claim that NMCs can last over 500,000 kilometers? Is it just poor user treatment or something else?
Well, how many EVs have been around for 10 years? It's 2024. Think back to 2014. About the only thing in mass production back then, and even, I don't even know if you would call it mass production, was the Tesla Roadster, right? So there's not been too many 10-year EV batteries out there at the moment. I have friends with Teslas from 2016 that still have 85% battery life, and I don't see why those batteries are going to be replaced at the 10-year point. So I think the vehicle makers are giving typically 8-year warranties on the batteries. And I think that's pretty darn safe, I think they're not going to have too many issues, unless there's a failed cell for one reason or another. My son-in-law his EV was taken in for its, its yearly diagnostic, and they found there was a weak cell in the pack. And they took it apart and replaced it free of charge under warranty. So as long as there's not something funny that happens with a particular cell or module, the pack's going to last a very long time.
I think anecdotally, the poor Nissan Leaf probably contributed a bit to that because it was an early EV and it was a pretty primitive pack that degraded quite quickly.
No active cooling.
Yeah, it was an air-cooled pack, right? And most of the Nissan Leafs were in the southern US, really hot. So that was just batteries were degrading rapidly at those high temperatures with an air-cooled pack.
Yeah. And important to emphasize to everybody on the call that we don't make EVs like that anymore because we've learned that you need to heat and cool your pack to keep
Now,
it from dying.
now that's an interesting statement because in India, Africa, a lot of two-wheelers and three-wheelers in very hot climates with air-cooled packs, right?
Really?
So there's billions of people that are facing the issue of air-cooled packs in hot climates, right? And that means you have to design batteries for that situation. And that's one of the things that we work on here in the lab.
The lizard battery.
Well, why should the battery in Canada, why should a battery that you have in an EV in Canada be the same as you have in Phoenix, Arizona? We can design a battery special that's better for Canada, that can handle low temperature operation better, and is not exposed to the same length of high temperatures that it is in the southern US, right?
Mm.
So these are kind of things that I think will happen in the future. There'll be, you'll have a vehicle designed for Canada and a vehicle designed for Phoenix.
Yeah, a lot of cars are delivered with, the gas cars are delivered with block heaters, but not in Arizona.
Right.
Okay. John asks, I think a prior speaker mentioned that an obstacle to vehicle to grid was the safety of power utility crews when making repairs. If they open a line under repair, vehicles sending power to the grid may keep that line live. Could you comment on that?
Well, that's interesting. How is that any different than a solar panel on your roof? Right? So I have a solar panel on my roof, and there's this giant red switch on the wall of my house that the power crews can come and just go clunk, right, and shut off my panel from the outside. And maybe there'll be some kind of a situation like that. I don't know. But also, there's going to have to be really good software to control the battery in your car. So it's doing vehicle to grid and operating in the state of charge range that you want. And the utility is going to know, is this vehicle connected to the grid or not, just by looking at their app. And they'll say, if it is, fine, it's connected. We got to disconnect it before we do stuff.
Okay. And here's an easy one. With NMC batteries, is it still a good idea to do a full charge to 100, do a full charge and a full discharge once in a while to calibrate the BMS?
No, I don't think that's necessary because the voltage of the battery is really the main indicator of the state of charge of an NMC cell.
Okay. Here's another classic. David asks, I keep getting questions about blood cobalt from the Congo. Is that still an issue? What's changed?
Well, one of the things that is happening is that the amount of cobalt being used in NMC batteries is going down and down and down. So, for example, when I talk about this nickel 94 material, that has about 3% cobalt in there. when you compare to something like NMC 622 with 20% cobalt. And, 811 is 10% cobalt. So the I guess the overall volume of cobalt use is maybe still going upward because of, greater battery production, but the fraction being used is less and less. And, we've written a lot of papers on how to eliminate cobalt altogether. And you can make a pretty darn good battery with no cobalt at all.
Okay, thank you. This one's a bit lengthy, so I may have to paraphrase it a little bit. Does the length of time a battery remains at 100% or a low state of discharge, like 20%, cause differences? In other words, if I discharge to 20% but immediately charge, will that help degradation, or will degradation still be a factor in that case?
There's no problem leaving your battery at 20% state of charge for as long as you want. That's not a bad place to be at all. Leaving the battery at 100% state of charge in hot temperatures, that's something you should, if it's NMC, that's something you should try to avoid. So, in terms of going down to 20% and sitting around for a while before you charge, that's fine, right? But I would say charge to 70%.
But no lower than 20, right? You wouldn't want to leave it sitting for a long period.
Um,
Doesn't matter.
I don't, as long as there's enough, I just don't know what kind of electricity draw is going on to the EV battery while it's sitting still. Maybe there's some small amount of discharge that's going on. So if you're going away for months, I would say don't leave it below 20%.
Yeah. Somebody did ask an extreme question after your episode a year ago about, so really what you're saying is if I could charge between 0 and 10% all the time, that would be the best thing. But I,
Well,
I don't know what kind of driving they do, but
no, but that's another technical question, because it depends if your battery contains silicon in the negative electrode. If it does, then you don't want to operate down at the very bottom because you're exercising the silicon a lot. For EV batteries that don't have silicon in the negative electrode, really no issue with going all the way down near 0.
so we have to find a way to have vehicle manufacturers share information about the batteries in the car we're buying. That, I mean, that needs to be something that we lobby for, perhaps, and try and get. I mean, and then it requires a huge explanation to the consumers because now you have to educate them on all the differences. But still, for those who care to understand fully this major expense that they've made, that information should be available, I think.
Yeah, and even if it's a simple thing like there's a handbook that comes with your vehicle that says this is what you should do, right? If it's a silicon containing system, it says, okay, no, don't operate between 30 and 0, type of thing very often. It's fine to go down there, now and then on a long trip, no problem, right? Just don't operate there all the time.
Fair enough. So people don't need to know why. They just need to know.
Yeah, there can be an appendix that says, if you want to know why, this is why.
Great, thanks.
Okay, going to some more local questions. Chris asks, given the Government of Canada consultations on Chinese EVs, where do you think Canada is on battery technology versus China?
Well, in terms of manufacturing, we're not in the same league, that's for sure. Now, mind you, there's a company in Maple Ridge, British Columbia, E1 Moly Energy Canada, that's been making lithium-ion batteries since 1994. And they make, I would say, the world's best power cell. So if you want a lithium-ion battery designed for delivering high power, you go to those guys. World's best, so they supply Dyson, for example, and other makers of high-end, high-powered battery-powered equipment. So it's not like Canada doesn't have few very strong manufacturers, but in terms of global dominance, we're just way, way, way behind China.
Well, North America was late to the starting gate.
Yeah.
And a related question that came in via email a few days ago are, I'll paraphrase again, basically, are Canadian battery manufacturers already falling behind the curve? Are they building factories for lithium-ion batteries that soon will be obsolete when a new technology such as solid state comes along?
I don't think they're going to be obsolete at all. The main reason is that a lithium-ion battery factory can switch from medium nickel to high nickel to increase energy density. It can switch to LFP. It can add silicon to the negative electrode. It's very flexible. And solid state is still a long time away from being produced at scale. I think a good example is QuantumScape in San Jose, who has been working on solid state for a long time. And their initial premise was to go from zero to automotive in one step. I mean, like, this is, in my opinion, crazy. You should go from zero to something small, like a watch or a phone. Learn what your technology can do and where the shortcomings are. And then start talking about massive packs for vehicle, right? It's like zero to infinity in one step. It's just, it's crazy, in my opinion.
Mm.
So I think solid state is going to need to take these little, if you want to call them baby steps, and that's going to take some time. So by the time the lithium-ion factories that are being proposed for Canada are built and operating, I don't think solid state is going to be very far along at that point. But solid state's coming along and getting better all the time. So I think it will come.
Jason, do you want to take a live question from the audience? We've never done it before, so try something different.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Okay.
we can try that. So, David, I think you were first, so I just allowed you to talk, so you can unmute and ask your question.
He's had his hand up for a while, so he may have gone for a comfort break or something.
Okay, let's
sure.
see. Stephen, you're up next then. You should be able to unmute and ask a question.
Oh, there he goes.
It's not a question, it's a statement. I have microfit 27 panels on top of my roof, and it feeds into an inverter. And to get microfit in Ontario, the inverter has an electric circuit that if the actual power goes off, it shuts down the inverter. So it won't allow the DC convert to AC to go back onto the power grid if the power grid goes down. So it's a built-in feature in the inverter. So the question of what happens vehicle to grid, if it has this circuitry in it, it will not go back to the grid because it would have been shut down because the circuitry it shut it down because it's a built-in feature to keep the grid workers safe. So that's what I have in my microfit program.
Well, that's good to know. That's a great way to do it.
But with microfit, it's a 20-year contract. I cannot put batteries in between. So it's all sold back to the grid. I have no control over it. but what they're paying me is too much for me to change it. So, um, well, they're paying me 38.4 cents per kilowatt generated.
Holy crap.
You're just making
And
us all jealous.
what was back in 2015. And during the winter, because I'm a snowbird, I generate twice as much what I use. And then during the spring, fall, summer and fall, I generate 5 times more what I use. So I'm always ahead so far.
Wonderful.
That's awesome.
So yeah, next year will be 10 years into the program.
Thank you,
Okay,
Stephen. Thanks, Stephen.
you're welcome.
I see Bob. Bob has a question. Jason. Whoops. Oh, we lost Jason. Okay. It's on me now. Let's go, Bob. Let's let you talk. Oh, allowed to talk.
I see Bob's popped up
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for the talk. Back to the microfit. I did a program in 2010 in London, Ontario, and you were discussing about if there was an emergency for the fire department. On my project, I did it on top of a public library. So we, like you, we have a switch on the outside, but what they also did at London Hydro is they put a sign on the hydro pole across the street. So if they had to cut off power, the fire department would know that there's power going into the building, even if it's down. My little funny story, I'll be quick. When I was with the city and it was my project, so I got to turn the switch on in the library. I put the switch on, we waited about 60 seconds for it to sync. We walked out the building and there's London Hydro nailing the sign on the pole. It was just the most bizarre thing that the timing, it's kind of like, oh, they put it on, we got to go put the sign up. But, so we're even better because we got in at the early part of the program. We're getting 82 cents a kilowatt,
Well,
20
Wow.
years. So we're 14 years in. So
That's wild.
it's, and the money all goes back to the library. So that's all I want
Wow.
to say. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob. Let's try John. John, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, Dr. Dahn. Thank you very much. Just a very quick question. Are you still under contract with Tesla? Are you allowed to say either way?
Yeah, our research group is still being funded by Tesla, and that's, it's been really fantastic. Working with Tesla is fantastic because, they're working in vehicles, they're working on energy storage, they're working on other things. There's links to SpaceX to get involved with batteries in that sphere. So our present funding arrangement runs until 2026, July, and I hope that we can renew it again. It's been really wonderful.
Good, thank you.
All right. Let's see now. I guess, David, do you want to give that another shot? I think we tried you before, but let's see if you're back on the case here. Go ahead. No, you have to unmute yourself. Oh, okay, no problem. Well, we're actually running out of time anyways, so I will, there we go. I think it's probably time we did a wrap, but my goodness, I have to just say again how much we appreciate you coming on, Jeff. It's incredible to hear directly from someone with your level of knowledge when we're out there driving these cars and you know to get this sort of background as to what's really going on under the hood is invaluable to us. And there aren't many people we can go to the way we've been able to communicate with you. And I don't have any other words other than to say we appreciate it very much.
Well, it's always fun. So thanks for having me.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit quickly about next month on Canada Talks Electric Cars. We're going to welcome, actually do something a little bit different. We're going to welcome a popular YouTuber by the name of Brian White to the episode. Brian's a host of a YouTube channel called Futuraza, And he'll be sharing his knowledge of the manufacturing processes that are being used right now to bring the costs of EVs way down for consumers. So pretty near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. Remember to mark that date. It will happen on Tuesday, September 3rd at 7:30 Eastern Time. So on behalf of the webinar team here at EV Society, I want to thank you all for joining us on today's episode and following our monthly webinar. Once again, if you're new to EVS, we hope you'll join us. And if by chance you're a member whose membership has expired, please take a moment to renew because we do need your support. So thanks to Jason and the other folks you don't sometimes see, James McCallum, Anise Sharifi from Fierce Media. We thank all these folks behind the scenes for doing this work, and Chris Guernsey, who didn't make it. Sorry we lost you, Jason. We'll see you next time. From all of us at EV Society, and until next time, stay well. This will conclude the webinar.